economics of Egypt. Before we really jump into the economics of Egypt, there are a couple of things that I want to make sure we are remembering or learning. So, you know how some of our lessons have taken longer. It's taken a day or two to kind of, or a couple, 3 days to learn stuff. Economics is going to go quick. So you know how like when we were doing social structures, I kind of went through and highlighted everything for you so you knew what to look for? We're not doing that with economics. We're getting back to where you all are practicing figuring out what the important information is based on what we are doing or learning. So before we jump into the slide presentation, there is a couple of things that I want to make sure we are remembering here. So hopefully we should be able to see this here. Yes. All right. So with our grapes chart, there we go. Stay. With our grapes chart, if we're learning about economics, quick reminder, economics is how a society uses its resources such as goods and money. So here's what you will need to do as we are going through this. Because remember, are we going to find and learn about things that are interesting, fun facts about Egypt? Yeah. Are we going to learn things that could possibly go in more than one grape? Yeah. So what we need to remember is we are focusing on the things that have to do with how society uses its resources. So here's what you need to think about. What were Egypt's most valuable resources and how did they distribute them? So how did Egypt figure out who got to use what? Now, if we think back to our politics slide, we already know who owned everything in Egypt, right? But how did the goods get spread out? How did people get what they needed or wanted? Okay? What does this civilization produce, grow, and trade? So any information that talks about what Egyptians either made, traded, or grew, we need to make sure that gets into our pink box in our grapes chart. Did the people barter? Did they use money? Or did they do both? Now, who can tell me what barter means? Yeah. Trade an item for another item. So we're going to have to figure out in ancient Egypt, how did they do it? Did they trade one item for another? Did they use money? Did they use cash? How did they do it? Now, this slide here is going to be super important for us as kind of a review. So, commerce. The word commerce refers to the buying and selling of goods and services. So we need to remember this. This needs to be in our pink box of our grapes chart. So this is going to be like the only one that I kind of give us. After this, we're going to be figuring out what we need to know in order to be successful with our learning goal of explaining the functions and structure of their economic society. Okay, so this is the one I'm giving you. After this, we're going to figure it out together. Yes, ma'am. Let me move this back where it belongs, then yes. That looks about right. There we go. Okay. Yes, you can go ahead. Adina, would you mind turning off the lights, please? Thank you. So, with commerce, like we see here, this guy wants vegetables, this guy wants fruit. Are they both getting what they want and what they need, yes or no?
Yes.
Are they using money to do it?
Yes.
No, right? They are trading. They are, what's the word we just talked about?
Bartering.
So commerce doesn't just have to do with money, okay? Does that kind of make sense? Because that's going to be an important thing for us to remember as we go forth. Do you have your Chromebook? And were you able to load it? Huh? Okay, there's a plug right there, so you can problem solve that. All right. May I please have a volunteer to read this first slide? All right. Thank you. Now, this word here is agrarian. Hold on, don't start yet, because we want to make sure that you can be heard. Here you go, ma'am. Go for it.
Ancient Egypt had an agrarian economy. An agrarian economy is when the majority of the wealth of a society comes from maintaining crops and farmland. Thanks to the Nile, Egypt had some of the best farmland in the ancient world. The ancient Egyptians would grow wheat, barley, vegetables, figs, and melons. The wheat and barley were especially important and used to make bread and beer.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Nice job. All right. So, again, I'm not telling us what we need to put. We're going to figure that out. So, thinking about economics. So, anything that had to do with what they made or how they use it. Our first sentence, ancient Egypt had an agrarian economy. Is that something that we need to know about the economics of Egypt? Yes or no? Yeah. And which one of that things does that go with? Well, yes, economics. But remember, I gave us 3 things that it said, right? So, does that help us with does that help us with resources? Does that help us what they produced, grow, or traded? Well, what does it say? An agrarian economy, it's what they made, right? So this would be what they produced, grew, or traded. Now, if we're honest with ourselves, are we going to remember what agrarian economy means in a couple of days? No, so we should probably know what that means. So our next sentence, is that going to be important? An agrarian economy is when the majority of wealth comes from maintaining crops and farmland. Do we need to know what that means? Yeah, right? Say that again for the people. Well, you're in the back, so say that again for the people in the front. Right? We've been using the word agriculture, but an agrarian economy is when the majority of wealth comes from crops and farmland. So we absolutely need to have that in our notes. Now, hold on. I promise I will give you time to type this into your notes, but I need us all focused in up here so we don't miss anything. So no typing now. I'll let you know when you can type and you will have time, I promise. Thanks to the Nile, Egypt has some of the best farmland in the ancient world. Is that an important economic fact? No. Is it an important fact for Egypt? Yeah. But where did we put that in our grapes chart? Not probably. We have this in our grapes chart already, right? So which grape did we put this in? Geography, right? So we already have this. We don't need that. The ancient Egyptians would grow wheat, barley, vegetable, figs, and melons. Do we need that? Yeah. Why do we need it? What does it tell us? Tells us what they were growing, right? And that's important because growing stuff is how they made their money, right? So the ancient Egyptians would grow wheat, barley, vegetables, figs, and melons. Okay, at this point, I will give you some time to go ahead and get that typed out. Please remember, if you don't get everything or if you miss a part, you can get it from a table partner. We are also recording this so you can get it from the recording later, and we'll have the slides in Canvas. So if you don't get it all now, don't freak out. You'll have several ways to get it. So we know that Egypt liked to grow things. That's how they made their money, their society successful. Although we will see on this slide, what we were just saying kind of isn't true, at least for part of their history, because, well, may I have a volunteer to read this slide? Okay. There you go.
Egypt wouldn't start using coins until around 500 BCE. Until then, Egypt used the barter system. The Egyptian state would often pay their workers in grain, who in turn would trade
Yep, you're good.
would trade some of that grain for other goods. To determine the value of your goods, it would be weighed on a scale against weights. These weights would be recognized by the same across Egypt and recognized by everyone.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. Awesome. So, again, you all are going to tell me, what do we need to know from this slide?
They would pay their workers in grain.
Okay, they would pay their workers in grain. Who would?
Egyptian state.
Egyptian state would often pay their workers in grain. Okay? Why is that important? Well, if it's economics, anytime you hear pay and economics, those two things go together, right? What else do we need to know from this slide about the economics of Egypt, ancient Egypt? So hold on, we shouldn't be typing yet, right? We'll have time for that, I promise.
They didn't use coins until 500 BC.
Yeah, they didn't start using coins until about 500 BCE. So what did they do before that? If they weren't using money, they used the barter system and they used grain, right? Okay, now you would get paid in grain, and then what would you do with that grain? Eat it or trade it. Those are the two things that you did with it, right? So you would trade some of that grain for other things that you needed. Okay, now before we start typing, I want us to notice something here, and this is going to be super important. So make sure you're kind of hearing this. So Egypt didn't start using money until like 500 BCE. But remember, Egypt had been around for like 3,000 years before then. Egypt had been around for a really long time, and they didn't use money. They used barter system and they used grain. Now, I'm going to do something, and I need you all, because again, I'm hearing the clickety-clack of keys, which means you aren't trusting me when I say I'm going to give you time later. I need you to hear this because this is important for us to understand, okay? They didn't use money, bless you. But what I'm going to do is I am going to replace the word grain with the word money, and you tell me if this sounds like modern-day United States. Egypt wouldn't start using coins until around 500 BCE. So until then, Egypt used the barter system. So listen to this part. The Egyptian state would often pay their workers in money, who would in turn trade some of that money for other goods. To determine the value of your goods, it would be weighed on scales against the weights. These weights would be the same across Egypt and recognized by everyone. So when we replace the word grain with money, does that statement still make sense? Yes. Does that sound like what we do with money today? Yeah, right? Your parents go to work, or if you have a job, you go to work, and you get paid in money. Now, for most of us, and I'm not going to, we'll let Miss Snowdell answer this for herself, like most grown-ups today, you don't get paid in cash. You don't even get a check anymore, right? What happens is the money just goes to your bank account, but you still get paid money, okay? You use the money that you get paid, which we got paid today, didn't we?
Did we?
Total rent, it's the 10th.
Oh, that's good news.
Nice.
Not that much.
Hey,
It's
no,
enough.
I don't know that.
Right. So I will tell you, like I've told other people in the past, I don't care if you know how much you make, but I do care that you know how to research. Educators are public employees, so if you tell me the information that you need to figure out how much I make, I will give you that information. You can know exactly how much I make, right? But you have to figure out what the information is that you need, and you need to come and tell me. Okay, so, but we're not doing that now because we have other things to learn. Okay, so again, grain was super important for them. Please go ahead and get this written down into your notes, and then we will get back together here for our next slide, which is going to be super duper important as well. Okay, so this next slide is also really important for understanding ancient Egypt. And this is all about grain banks. So, may I please have a volunteer to read this one? So we'll go here, and then you could read the next one.
Can I just hold it and talk into it?
You don't even have to talk into it. You can just kind of hold it like right
Oh.
there. That's fine.
The Egyptian people would deposit their grain into one of the state's grain warehouses. If you ever wanted to buy something, you would pull some of your grain out of the grain bank. The bank would charge a fee payment for a service, which would be a portion of your grain. This portion would go to the state, which would use it however it sees fit. Sees fit, like to pay workers or troops.
Thank you. Okay. You have a question? Yes, wait. What is your question?
How would they know how much? Do you have like an exact grain deposit for yourself?
That is a fantastic question. Once we get what we need highlighted, I will talk about that because we're actually going to learn that just a little bit. But that was a really good question. Okay. So you all tell me, what do we need from this slide if we're talking about economics?
Deposit their grain into one of the state's grain.
Right. So Egyptians would deposit their grain into one of the state's grain warehouses. That's going to be important. What else do we need to know about the economics of Egypt from this slide?
The bank would charge a fee.
Okay, so yeah, we went down here. So the bank would charge a fee. And what was that fee? Cadence, I know you've got this, but let's let somebody else have a chance to answer. But I appreciate the fact that you are on it, girl. Yes. So the bank would charge a fee, and that fee would be some of your grain. Now, what does that sound like that we have to pay today? Taxes, right? It's kind of like taxes. Okay. Now, I think there's another. Well, I don't think there is another important part that we need to have here that we kind of missed. Okay. Yes. Yep. To buy something, you would pull some of your grain out of the grain bank. So again, I'm going to replace the word grain with money, and you tell me if this sounds like today. The Egyptian people would deposit their money into one of the state's grain warehouses. If you ever wanted to buy something, you would pull some of your money out of the money bank. The bank would charge you a fee, which would be a portion of your money. This portion would go to the state, which would use it however it sees fit. Does that kind of sound like how banks work today?
Yeah.
That's exactly how banks work today. Well, it's okay. You don't have to, but I don't like the fact that we are just... Okay, so let's see. Grayson, come have a seat right here. Okay, so with our banks, the way that it would work, and this kind of answers your question, sir. So you would get paid in grain, just like today people get paid in money. And just like today, how a lot of people don't just keep all their money with them, they put it in the bank. People would take their grain to a grain bank. And when you would go to the grain bank, there would be scribes there, and they'd have a weight, they'd have the scale, and you'd go and you say, okay, I have 50 pounds of grain. And they'd weigh it, they'd be like, yep, that's 50 pounds of grain. And then they would write down, such and such, Miss Snowdell gave 50 pounds of grain to the grain bank here. And they would give you a receipt. And then you would keep that receipt. Just like when your parents go to the bank today, they give you a deposit slip or withdrawal slip. And well, thankfully, you don't have to keep that receipt because they keep it on computers, but it's a good idea to keep it because if the computers get messed up, then that's your proof. Yeah. They did have scales back then. Remember, we saw it on the previous slide. So they were the like teeter-totter looking scales, right? And so, yes.
Yeah, that was me.
Mhm.
So how did they so I know they use like the things that are like this, but when they did it, how did they know how much 15 pounds was? So did they take like something that was 15 pounds and then like?
That's a fantastic question. We're going to go back one slide because it, you know, okay. Yeah.
They would use a what's it called? A weight
Mhm.
to weigh the.
Yeah, so we kind of see it in this picture here, right? So there'd be weights, and what would happen would there'd be these official weights from the pharaoh, right? And so the scales, they would use these weights, and they were stamped saying that yes, these weights are approved by the pharaoh, and they're the weights that everybody used. And so they were the same across all of Egypt. So like any scale, they would have to have the approved weights and the approved measurements. And then that way, it didn't matter where in Egypt you went. If you were in Thebes, if you were in Memphis, wherever you were, if you went to one of these weigh stations, the weights would be exactly the same, and they would have to check those weights every year to make sure that they were accurate. And that's why people could trust them. Now, honestly, we kind of do the same thing even today. Have you ever helped your parents pump gas? You know how there's that little sticker on the gas thing that has like, it usually has a punch out for like the month and the day? There are people, next time you pump gas, look, you'll see a little sticker. I think this year they're red maybe. You will see a little sticker, and it says it's from the Missouri Department of Agriculture. And basically the Department of Agriculture they have representatives go to every gas pump to make sure they're accurate, right? To make sure that when it says it's giving you a gallon of gas, it's actually giving you a gallon of gas. When you go to the store, the scales that they use to like weigh your vegetables and fruits, those are calibrated and checked all the time too to make sure they're accurate. So they did that same thing back then. Okay, really good questions. I love the way we're thinking about this. Okay. So this next slide is easy and it'll go super duper quick. Okay, luxury goods. The term luxury goods refers to expensive goods that are not needed but make life more enjoyable. Okay, so we need to get that into our notes. A luxury good, it's not something that you need for survival, but it makes life more interesting or more fun. So we need to get this into our notes. The term luxury goods refers to expensive goods that are not needed but make life more enjoyable. Okay. So, necessity goods. So these are kind of the opposite of luxury goods. So the term necessity goods refers to goods people will always buy because they always need them. So necessity goods are things that you need in order to survive. So imagine you're responsible for buying the food for your family. You just found out that the price of food has doubled. Well, even if the price of food doubles, do you still need food to survive? Yes. So even if the price of food has doubled, your family still needs to eat, so you're still going to have to pay for that, right? Maybe you'll find a different way to get the money to pay for that food. You might have to sell some of your luxury goods, or maybe you might have to work more. But food is a necessity good, not a luxury good. Now, are some foods luxury goods? Yeah, like you caviar, that's a good example, right? Caviar, you don't need caviar to survive, but it's something that people think makes life more enjoyable. Right? It depends if you like. I mean, some people like it. It's really salty and kind of fishy. So if you don't like fish, no, you probably wouldn't like caviar then. All right. So the term necessity goods refers to things that people will always buy because you need them. These are the things like food, shelter, water, clothing. Okay, so may I please have a volunteer to read? Oh, no, it's Trey. Here you go.
As early as the Old Kingdom, Egypt sought trade with their neighbors. The land of eastern Mediterranean had forests, which Egypt lacked. They would sail across the sea just to purchase cedar wood.
Cedar wood. Mm-hmm.
They would also buy olive oil and metals, like copper and tin, from a variety of lands.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, so you tell me, what do we need on this slide? Caitlin, what's one important thing that we need to know for the economics of Egypt from this slide?
Egypt sought trade with their neighbors.
Yes, Egypt sought trade with their neighbors, right? Because remember, one of our things for economics was, did the people barter, use money, or both? And what did they trade? So this actually helps us out with two of the things. So now, if we know that they traded with their neighbors, what did they trade? So they got, I didn't ask that question very well. What did they import? What were the things that they got from other places? Cedar wood, olive oil, and metals, right? So these are the things. Nope, I'm lying to you. These are the things that Egypt would import. Okay? So they would import wood because remember, they lived in a desert. They would import olive oil. They would import metal. Now, even though it doesn't say it on this slide, what did they export? What did they trade away? Grain, right? Because that's one of the people they traded with. Remember, the same time Egypt was going on, Mesopotamia was a thing too. So it's not like Mesopotamia stopped and Egypt started. They interacted with each other. They overlapped. Remember in our Tutankhamun video, King Ramses said he was the Hittites' foe. He fought the Assyrians. So the same time Egypt is a thing, Yeah, there's stuff going on in Mesopotamia, and they would trade with each other, they would fight with each other, and all this sort of stuff. So that was a really good question. So from this slide, we know that Egypt wanted to trade with their neighbors, okay? And the things they would import would be cedar wood, olive oil, and metals. That's what they would get from Mesopotamia. Okay? So take a moment to get this written into your notes. Let me say first off, you all have done a pretty good job. I'm not going to say an excellent job, but you all have done a pretty good job of staying focused on a day where we pretty much did notes all day. This is our last slide, so let's finish strong. Do I have somebody who'd be willing to read this last slide? Thank you, but I'd like to see if we could have somebody who hasn't read yet read, because we have lots of people who have not read. All right, go for it.
Trade with Cush. There was also trade going on between Egypt and the land of Cush. Cush was located south of Egypt in modern-day Sudan. The most valuable goods that Egypt bought were gold, ivory, elephant tusks, and dark black wood called ebony. The Egyptians would pay the Cushites in grain, cloth, papyrus, glass, and jewelry. Egypt would begin to rely on Cush for gold, while Cush relied on Egypt for grain.
Thank you. All right. So, what do we need from this slide? Okay. Egyptians would pay in grain, cloth, papyrus, glass, and jewelry. And I'm leaving the Cushites off because that's also what they used to pay in Mesopotamia. Yes. Yeah. Okay. There was trade going on between Egypt and Cush. Okay. All right. What else do we need to know from this slide as far as economics go? We know they traded. We know what they exported, right? So these are going to be our exports. Cush relied on Egypt for grain. Well, I suppose we could put that, right? We could put that Cush relied on Egypt for grain and Egypt relied on Cush for gold. But I think we don't need to put that here because we kind of have it here. We know that they traded for grain, right? So we don't need to double our workup, right? So we know what Egypt exported. What did Egypt import? Such as? Wood.
Cedar wood.
Okay. So cedar wood from Mesopotamia. What about from Cush? What kind of wood did they get from Cush?
Gold, ivory.
So they got dark black wood called ebony. They got gold, and they got ivory. It is a type of soap. It floats in water. Okay. So these are the imports. Okay. So on this last slide, we should have who they traded with. So we know they traded with Mesopotamian people. They traded with Cush. We know they imported wood, cedar wood, ebony wood, olive oil, metal, like gold, tin, and copper. They imported ivory. They imported ebony. We know they exported lots of grain. We know they exported glass, jewelry, things like that. Papyrus, linen, cloth. So we know what they traded for and what they got. At this point, you have everything that you need in order to completely fill out your study guide. For the last part of class, our lights are going to go to purple, so you'll be able to work with your table groups. And you can work on filling out your study guide because you have everything you need to fill out the rest of your study guide.